Titleist GT1 Tour. Fairway, they launched mid-year this year and it's got Tour usage, but other than a white number 1 and the word Tour on it, what have they changed and what does it do performance-wise, and is it right for you? So what have they actually done? GT1 Tour has a stated loft of 14.5, but the standard GT1 3-wood has a stated loft of 15. Now, GT1 was originally launched to be a bigger head profile, a shallower face than the GT2, to be a good fairway wood for players who want to get it up and out quickly, so a higher launching club. Part of how they achieve that is the actual loft on the standard GT1 15 degree measures more than it states. So it measures more than the GT2 and GT3 at the same stated loft. So that's part of how they got the ball up a little bit more. So GT1 had interest from tour players because it's a bigger head profile, shallower face, it's easier off the deck. But at the loft that it was at, flighted too high. So what they've done, introduced the 14.5, which is actually much more of a true 14.5 loft for a fairway wood. So there's more of a difference in loft than there appears to be from the stated numbers, which brings that flight down and spin down and gets it in the window where the tour players are comfortable using it. Hence, there is tour usage of this head. So what are the plus points versus the other models? Well, the GT1, a bit shallower, a bit bigger, more forgiving, better off the deck because it's a lower centre of gravity. So a better fairway wood in that respect. So it's not just for moderate speeds, this is clearly the high speeds using it as well. But between the GT1 Tour and the original GT1 and GT2, we've already got some backup of data with those, but we're going to compare weight back and weight forward with the GT1 Tour, talk about the change in performance when you change the weight, but then also compare them to the other two models to tell you exactly what you can expect from it. So in testing these all with my own setup, it's the same shaft that I use in my fairway wood, the same specs and swing weight, so for me it's a natural one to swing, and we've got exactly the same shaft, we just switched heads on this particular shaft. So GT1, I mean, the Titleist heads are really pretty creatures. It's a very clean look. I think with this one, that's slightly bigger profile, shallower head, it sits down behind the ball nicely. And ultimately, for their tour players, any of the brands on tour, a lot of the players use a ping fairway wood. They've got massive usage on tour. So this really is a bit of a reason to get that out of their brand ambassadors' hands and get the tour players playing a Titleist head versus a ping one. So it's a very ping-like head. Bigger profile, shallower, sits down behind the ball, lower center of gravity, so collects the ball better, helps with a bit of flight and forgiveness. So it's a really good looking head. It sets up nice and square, and you've got a nice sort of square base, so there's lots of club head on the ground, which means you've got lots of face to get contact with the ball with. So going to hit a few with the weight back, and then we'll look at the data. So being a little bit bigger, it's a slightly more hollow feel than the other Titleist models, that they're going to be a little higher pitched, a little more solid feeling. But with the depth of the scale of the head, you're going to get that. But it's definitely a very stable feel. I mean, it feels like there's a lot of club head to make contact with there. Very easy to collect off the ground. Say weight back, that's maximising the CG as far back from the face as possible, which gives it a little more lift, a little bit more forgiveness, but a bit more spin as well. But ultimately, a very easy head to collect as far as a 3-wood is easy to hit off the ground. A little bit necky, so that's going to come out weak, but I'm not feeling lots of twisting at the head of the head at impact. So it's not, as I say, it's not going to be as solid as the other Titleist models or the GT2 and 3, but the one, definitely, it's a very user-friendly head. You really feel like you can get away with quite a lot. I've overcompensated a little bit and got that a bit toey from the previous one out the heel, but there's a real stability to the head at impact. And I think that's something that Titleist fairway woods over the years have generally been kind of better players' heads. You've had to get the strike point higher up the face to get the real sweet spot, which has meant that if you tend to be a picker of the ball, or you're someone who's just less confident with a fairway wood, you're going to tend to get a strike lower on the face, and then they can come out a bit dead. This is a very different animal. Especially with that weight back, it feels really quite simple to get off the ground. Bit of a pull, but a proper hit. So I'll just do one more of this, and then switch the weight around, and we'll see how different that feels, because we're moving, we've got an 11 gram at the back, it's a 4 gram at the front, so it's quite a bit of mass, 7 grams moving quite a long way within the head. So it does give you the ability to dial in that spin profile and the feel off the head. So let's switch those weights around, compare the data. So obviously the only difference being that I've switched the weights around. So we now got the heavy weight at the front and the light weight at the back. So that moves the center of gravity forward, which in principle means a hair more ball speed, but also should bring that spin down a little bit. But you do lose a little bit of forgiveness as well. So immediately a change in the sound off the head. Weight back, it just has a little bit more of a hollow tone to it. That one's slightly more solid, a little bit of a crisper note to it. So it's less of a difference in actual feedback from the strike, but certainly a really different change in the tone off the club head. Yeah, and you know, that goes some way, the sound goes some way to making it feel a little bit more solid as well. But, as I've misstruck that one a little low heel, I can feel the head twist a little bit more when I misstrike it. So I definitely feel the punishment of the head moving that weight forward definitely means you've got to be a bit more exacting with your strike. Otherwise, you're going to notice the contact, notice that miss hit a little bit more readily. So some of that feeling of forgiveness is the fact that, you know, the head resists twisting a little bit more with the weight back. So it's less sensitive to those missed strikes. Weight forward, twist around a little bit more, you're going to know you've mishit it a little bit more directly. So I better be more accurate with these. Yeah, and that was a solid hit. So certainly weight forward just feels like there's a bit more guts on the back of the ball. I mean, that one's a particular shot's a noticeably lower spin. So the previous shot was right at the low heel. That one's definitely more centered, and it's got a noticeably more powerful flight to it. So you don't have to have extreme weight differences. You could have two of the same weight, as long as the total weight in the club stays the same. If it's an 11 and a 4, you've got 15 grams, so you could do 2 7s and a little bit of lead tape, for example, on the head to equal the same massive club, but to neutralize the weight profile out of it. And that manages the spin, you know, between the extremes that we're going to be testing here. You can go in between if you can get access to different weights for the heads. It's just making sure the total weight of the head stays the same. But a much more solid feel, a much more powerful flight. Still launched well, still got plenty of launch angle there. But a stronger, more going ball flight. So again, that one just under 3,000 spin. You know, that's much punchier. We were getting much higher spins with the other heads. We'll compare in a moment. But you are going to have to be more exacting on the contact in order to make the most of that weight forward. So I'm going to do one more with this, and then we'll check out the data and let you know what you can expect to see from the Tour to the other two heads. Very nice. So initially look at the original GT1 against GT2 performance and compare those, just to give a bit of a backup to then the relevance to the data with the GT1 Tour. So, you know, GT2 mid-launch, mid to strongish, mid-spin, you know, kind of very neutral ball flight for me, and you know, so pretty, you know, nice numbers all around from a kind of a mid ball flight. GT1 weight back, now those ones launched a little bit lower, and this could be strike orientation, but spin noticeably higher. We're up 700 revs, so it's a good 20% higher in terms of spin. So quite a notable change in that spin profile with the weight back with the GT1. And interestingly enough, even weight forward, now this likely to be just slightly peculiar to the shots that I've hit here. That's still launched high. Obviously the loft stays the same, but the weight forward in principle brings the spin down. Now, spin has stayed within 50 revs. For me, the spin's more consistent weight forward. That's something that I found throughout all of my clubs, you know, be it a driver, be it a fairway wood. Weight back, I tend to get a little bit more volatility of spin. So that's something that's just based around my strike pattern and my delivery. But it's a bit more consistent with the weight forward, but spin relative to launch angle is a little bit lower. Now it's still launched high, so as a head it's still doing its job of getting it up in the air, but weight forward has just proportionally brought the spin down a touch more. However, for a 3-wood for me, that's more of a 5-wood spin. That's more where I'd be looking for out of a higher lofted fairway wood. So the GT1, its original format for me, just a bit too high spin. Now, what happens when we compare the GT1 against the GT1 Tour? So, this is GT1 Tour and original GT1 3-wood with the weight back. So, with both of them, launch angle exactly the same. So actually I've managed to launch the GT1 Tour proportionally slightly better, but we saw this with the comparison between the original GT1 weight back and weight forward. But the spin now is down much lower. It's actually very similar to GT2. We'll come on to that a bit later on. But launch angle the same, but with that 640, 630 odd revs lower spin. So by getting the loft down, it's brought the spin down noticeably. So what that means is carry is a little bit stronger. Now the ball speed was a hair less on those swings with the GT1 Tour, but we've picked up a couple of yards in carry, but it's run out another 6 or 7. So you match up the ball speed, you're probably picking up 10 yards or so through a flatter top to the flight. So when we now compare weight forward data, what we can see here is, obviously I did launch the first gen GT1 weight forward quite high, but the spin difference is even greater, partly because of that, but we're 1,070, 1,080 revs difference. So really noticeable. So that lower loft and weight forward has now got that flight coming out noticeably lower, noticeably less spin, 6 yards more on carry, even though the ball speed's a couple of miles an hour down, but now 15, 16 yards longer total. So for my dynamics, that GT1 Tour with the loft that much lower has made a much stronger ball flight, so more powerful. So it suits the higher speed player who doesn't need as much lift getting it up in the air. So if we add the GT2 data to the GT1 Tour, get a look at that and then compare those numbers. So yes, a lot of comparisons here, and I'll kind of précis these at the end, but comparing the GT1 Tour and the GT2, what we can see here is GT1 Tour weight back, which is at the top here, and the flight off the GT2 are as near as damn it identical. So, ball speed's a couple of miles an hour difference between these, so the distances slightly fall out of sync with one another by 5 yards, but spins 23 revolutions difference, launch is 0.2 of a degree difference. So pretty darn identical ball flights, albeit the GT1 Tour in principle is just that little bit more forgiving. And we can see from that spin consistency just a little bit tighter, the deviation here, 340 revs versus 436. So those two, you can get a nigh identical ball flight, but the different head shape and in principle a little bit more forgiveness. Some players are definitely going to prefer GT1 Tour versus GT2 and vice versa. But weight forward, again, we see launch angle down a half a degree, but the spin's now come down 400 odd revs. So that weight forward GT1 Tour gives you, probably lose some of the forgiveness element there, but a noticeably stronger spin without having to go to the depth of head of the GT3. So actually within this, the head's given us quite a lot of coverage between GT1, GT1 Tour, GT2, between spin, forgiveness, head profile behind the ball. You haven't got to go deep and towering over the back of the ball, and realistically having to get the strike up the face as much to get quite a strong performance on spin with that weight forward. So what have we learned from that test? Now there were a lot of comparisons, and I get a little bit of potentially confusion, so I'm going to give a nice little roundup here. So start with GT2. The GT2, mid-size head, kind of neutral, mid-launch, mid-spin, probably suits someone who squeezes it a little bit more, just hits down on it slightly because you've got to get the strike higher up the face than the GT1 heads, but a moderate head size, mid-launch and spin, got a good all-round head. GT1, the kind of the original 3-wood, is that bigger head profile, a little bit shallower. So if you're looking for something that's easy to pick off the ground, then the GT1 definitely gives you that. But because the base loft is that little higher and the weight sits naturally a little further back in the head, original GT1 3-wood will launch it higher and spin it more. So even weight forward, the spin sits, at best, a little bit higher than the GT2, but it's going to launch it higher as well. So you're going to see that pickup in flight versus GT2 with a little bit of a higher spin. GT1 Tour gives you that same slightly bigger footprint, a little bit of a shallower profile, so a slightly more forgiving profile for off the fairway usage. But with that loft coming back down, weight back gives you very much the same flight as GT2, but a slightly better head for someone who picks it off the turf a bit more. And then weight forward, you lose a bit of that forgiveness, but brings that spin right down. So there's quite a lot of versatility with these heads from a weight position, loft scenario that you can interchange to find the head that really suits you and can dial in relative to your strike pattern, which one's best. But do test them, because there are some pretty small nuances. So going just based on theory, you may, if you're unfortunate, just pick the wrong head. So make sure you test them and get the data to show why it's best and which one ultimately gives you the best performance overall. So I hope that helps with the new GT1 Tour coming out and how it sits within their line. If you've liked it, please subscribe, hit the like button, let us know what you want to see, and we'll see you again in the next video.